Welcome back. The Biden administration plans to release its updated national defense strategy sometime next year. That new strategy will come as a major cyber incident escalating tensions with Russia and an international pandemic change the nation's defense priorities potentially. Clementine Starling is Deputy Director of Forward Defense and resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. She's writing about the NDS along with Matthew Crouch in the National Interest. Clementine, welcome. Thanks very much for coming on. And you and Matthew refer in this piece to a paradigm adjustment, not a paradigm shift. What's the difference?
Yeah, thank you, Francis. It's great to be here. That's a great question. By an adjustment, not a shift, what we mean is in the last NDS, the 2018 NDS, it did a very good job of characterizing the security environment, putting great power competition back on the agenda, which is key. That still holds true today and should remain the same. But the adjustment that we think is critical is to characterize that competition in a new way, to broaden it out. So the last NDS really focused on great power competition as being defined by high-end, high-tech warfare, which is true. The US needs to prepare for that. But the reality is, on a daily, weekly basis, the US and its allies face a swath of hybrid attacks from near-peer competitors like Russia and China. And the next NDS needs to pivot to focusing not only on the high-end high-tech, but also the lower end, below the threshold hybrid threats that really risk vulnerabilities to the US. And there needs to be this acknowledgement that adversaries like China are quite happy to win or to dominate by not firing a single bullet. So if that's where our competitors are competing with us today, we need to meet them there and compete in that hybrid realm as well.
You and Mr. Crouch proposed 4 pillars on which to build the next NDS. The first of those is posturing the department for effective multi-spectrum competition. And it sounds from your description like there's much more to it than just, say, designating cyber as another domain and moving on.
Yeah, that's right. And I think what that posturing for effective multi-spectrum competition means is that means not just ensuring that that's a core feature in the NDS, but that it's a core feature in the national security strategy as well. Because to compete across multiple spectrums, so in dealing with disinformation, cyber attacks, predatory economic practices, coercive diplomacy, the whole range of hybrid threats really requires not only DoD to have a key role and defining what that role is in multi-spectrum competition, but also DoD supporting other agencies like the Department of Homeland Security, the Department of Justice, Department of State. So what we're really calling for is a whole of government approach to that multi-spectrum competition, because the reality is there is no longer such a distinction between international threats and threats to the homeland. They bleed together. We've seen that. So it requires our government agencies to respond collectively and share situational awareness, share the situational picture, and determine defined kind of roles and resources for how to compete in those different areas of competition collectively.
I'm going to skip out of order for a moment for the sake of time. You referenced number 3 as lethality and force modernization, and number 4 as departmental and acquisition reform. Those are topics that we've covered on this program on a number of occasions. So I want to go back to number 2, Clementine, and that is modernizing and strengthening alliances. And you and Mr. Crouch referenced the Quad and NATO, of course, and some of the other mechanisms. Is it time for some kind of treaty or alliance mechanism in the South Pacific similar to NATO, do you think? Or are the alliances that we have sufficient if they're strengthened somewhat?
It's a great question. I think it's a challenge. The US needs to rely on its allies and partners because it can't be everywhere globally, especially when dealing with 2 near-peer competitors who are obviously in different regions of the world, but they are also active in other continents globally. So in the next NDS, the US absolutely needs to prioritize where it wants to be in terms of presence, in terms of investing in what it chooses to invest in terms of defense technology. On the alliances front, I think it would be very tough to create a version of NATO in the Indo-Pacific. The history, the relationships between the US's allies and partners there are very complex. But I do absolutely believe that the US needs to shore up its existing alliances in the Indo-Pacific and attempt to turn partners that currently exist into new allies, perhaps. So strengthening the US's relationship with partners like India, with Indonesia, with kind of identifying who those allies are, and really determining what kinds of ways the relationship could be strengthened, whether that's kind of training and exercising, it's foreign military sales, there are a range of different things, as well as encouraging the US's allies and partners to work together, not just with the US, but shoring up those relationships in that way too would be very important.
Clementine Starling, thanks very much for joining me. It's great to have you here.
Thank you very much.